In this third and final lecture on faunal analysis, I'd like to talk about what you can interpret from faunal remains. Why would you hire a faunal analyst? Well, if you've ever asked that question, why hire a faunal analyst, there's a number one answer you should give. Diet. We're interested in the diet of people and what meat they ate. But faunal analysis can also tell us what technology was required to obtain that food. It can trace the process of domestication. It can help reconstruct the paleoecology of the local habitats or the habitats that people are targeting. And it can tell us perhaps what season deposits were made at the site. When was this layer? When was the fill from this pit deposited? Diet is not a straightforward subject. Does everyone eat the same food? What can the food tell us about the ethnicity, the ritual, or status of various peoples or groups? Is the same food served at all social situations? What cuts of meat were favored? Does the society practice a focal or a diffuse economy? What technology was required to obtain the food that you see, or the sizes of fish, for example? Did you need boats for deep sea fishing? Were you using nets? Were you spearing fish? Using fish hooks? What size net openings? Are you obtaining small fish, large fish, deep water fish, shallow water fish? What were your butchering practices? How are bone tools being made? Now, whereas the faunal analyst is the person to go to identify the bones used to make tools, they don't necessarily analyze the tools themselves. To look at domestication, which, as you already know, is a genetic change, you need to look for changes in the morphology through time. These can be quite subtle in domesticated animals. But for example, you might see a change in the horn size or the shape. You might see smaller animals, then again you might see larger animals after domestication. But if animals are domesticated to be less fierce, also they're likely to have smaller canine teeth. Basically, to trace domestication, you need to see change through time. What habitats are nearby? Or what habitats are people targeting? Freshwater mollusks, for example, can tell us about local river conditions. Given that mussel shells are usually collected for eating, that you are unlikely to carry them away but instead leave them nearby where you collected them, these freshwater mussel species can tell you about the habitats that used to be present in the river. Most rivers today have very different habitats than they did in the past. Today, most rivers have been dammed or polluted, and many of the same species are no longer living there, or species that used to be favored are now rare, and species that used to be rare might now be favored. So, did the river used to be clear, shallow, with riffles? Is it now deep, muddy, with mud bottoms? Different species of mussels prefer different habitats. Additionally, you might find animals that lived in prairies, and yet you have no prairie nearby today. Did there used to be a prairie nearby or on your site in the past? Discovering the seasonality of your deposits opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. Given that you normally would not walk around with a rotting bone in your pocket, but instead would dispose of it, when was that bone disposed of? What season of the year was it? And therefore, what season were people living at the site or throwing trash in this particular pit? A number of indicators might help you with seasonality. Migratory animals, antlers, if they're attached, the presence of medullary bone, the presence of annular growth rings, or the age at death of an animal with a limited breeding season. I'll go through each of these. Migratory animals are often present only twice a year. If that's the case in your area, then perhaps if you found trumpeter swan bones, that would indicate one of those 2 times of year. Antlers still attached to the skull also can indicate a range of months within the year. Loose antlers are not good at telling you the season because loose antlers may be curated and not indicate the point at which they were thrown away. Medullary bone is found only in ovulating birds when they are producing eggs. And given that most birds do this on a seasonal basis, if you find medullary bone, you can tell that it's egg-laying season. Some faunal remains accumulate annular rings, much like tree rings. They can tell you not only perhaps the age of that animal, but also the season of death. Here is a cross-section of a hard clam showing you the annual light and dark bands that can incrementally accumulate. One of my favorites that I wish that I would find at all of my sites are otoliths, fish ear bones. These, you can see quite clearly, look a lot like the cross-section of a tree stump where you can see the annular tree rings. If you had otoliths throughout your deposits, potentially you could seriate your garbage pits. Isn't that a wonderful idea? Another way of estimating seasonality is when you have animals with a seasonal birth date and some part of their body that could tell you their age at death. One example of this is white-tailed deer. If you have a young white-tailed deer who hasn't yet had all of their teeth erupt, and if white-tailed deer were born only during a certain season. In the Midwest, the average birth date today is June 1st. If that, from the tooth eruption, if that young dead deer died at 6 months of age, then that jawbone was deposited around November 1st. So why hire a faunal analyst? What could be the goals of faunal analysis? Well, do you remember the number 1 goal? Diet of humans. What meat did they eat? And along with that, a whole myriad of social, cultural questions. But perhaps you can tell a bit about technology. What kind of technology did it take to hunt that animal or that size animal? Or to fish that kind of animal? What kind of habitat and technology? What was the process of domestication? Was this a wild animal? Was this a domesticated animal? Can you trace that through time? Can you reconstruct the ecological setting of the site area or of the habitats that people might be deliberately targeting, whether they're local or not? And can you determine the season of deposit or of your entire site occupation?